Ready to go? So welcome to our press availability, our media availability, and also we welcome those who are watching on the internet, and we invite them to participate by sending us questions or any comments that you'd like. This is the end of week number 1, and not unusual. We've not had a lot of big issues so far that usually come towards the middle of the session, but we've had a few little things to talk about, and so I'll open it up to questions.
Last night, Chairman Valentine gave the estimate on the impact from the federal changes, and aside from what he recommended doing, there's the possibility of, if we get down to that 25 million, of adding some sort of personal exemption to bring that further down. Has the Senate talked about that as a possibility? Raise it, because we have no longer have a personal exemption, so he said we could raise it to a certain number. Is there an appetite to do that?
Well, I think that it was so clear to everybody last night in EAC, the ramifications of the commissioner's comments. Is that clear to everybody? Did you understand everything that Valentine said last night?
All your questions were just so helpful.
I was trying to get some kind of a stir here.
Numbers people talking.
It was riveting, I thought, didn't you?
I appreciated your comments, Senator. I think you used the word confusing, something along those lines.
Well, we haven't talked a lot about it because, and we have Senator Stevenson here, I think that I can address it, but I'm just going to say that after some clarity, at least in my mind, we need, I can see an area here, or I think there's some policy here to discuss, and the policy I see from this is this new itemized deduction for the pass-through entity, LLC, partnership, S corporation, giving them that deduction. That was given on the federal level because they lowered the corporate income tax rate to 20%. And so to bring some parity so that we're not incentivizing people to go out now who are LLCs and all of a sudden now become C corporations, that was the purpose for that change in the federal law or the federal tax. In Utah, we already have parity. If you have an LLC or a corporation, or an LLC or an S corporation or a partnership, you pay 5% because our individual rate is 5%. If you have a C corporation, you pay 5% because that's our corporate rate. In my opinion, we don't need to deal with that. We need to make clarifications. But if we give a deduction, an additional deduction now for pass-through entities on the state return, it will create a disparity between corporations and LLCs and drive more entities towards LLCs and pass-through entities.
You could give 20% on the corporate side as well.
We could change that, but I think that's the message that at least I got last night in the conversation that I had with Valentine. That I don't think we need to do anything unless we either want to do it to corporations and LLCs, or just if we want to leave it at the 5%. We don't need to add that deduction. So I see us having now about $80 million to deal with in some tax reform. Senator Stevenson?
I think right now it's like trying to do business in the fog. This has come at us very quickly. We've been talking about tax reform, and there are, we've got initiatives on the board, and when you look at the whole package, it may be best if we sit tight with this next year.
And do nothing? Maybe other than clarify.
Just clarify, but I think that's really, and I do think we've got some choices as we look at what Commissioner Valentine gave to us last night. We've got a range that we can work in there, and it depends. Come on. And it depends on, in that range, it depends on where we feel comfortable, because we, those numbers that he gave us, we have got some additional spending there we can work with. But I think we need to be careful where we go. We need to be I would think we need to be conservative in the process.
So how do you tell voters that they're going to end up paying $80 million more than anticipated in Utah because of the federal tax cuts? They're getting a tax cut on the federal side, but Utah's taking more money from them. How do you square that politically?
Well, we haven't had that discussion. My personal opinion is that I think that we'll find a way to reduce taxes by $80 million on the personal side. I agree 100% that on the corporate side, Commissioner Valentine is spot on. We have no idea. So because we're not sure that the certainty level is really low, I wouldn't want to dive into that and do something and then find out we did something that didn't work.
But if you count on that $80 million to pay for a tax cut, maybe a reduction in the income tax rate, is that what you're thinking?
It could be a rate. We could add an additional deduction for something, which is not broadening the base. My hope is that we would find a way to lower the rate, and of course I think we have the information now. We'll start having some discussions on how we do that.
But to Senator Stevenson's point, yeah, I mean, do you want to count on that money by lowering the rate and assuming that you'll?
Well, I mean, I guess I thought in my conversation with Valentine last night that he felt pretty sure that that's what we've got. And like any forecast, you have to at least have some faith in what the forecasts are. And we'll talk about our fiscal analysts and others, and they're obviously, we'll all have a little different opinion on what we should do, but we'll try and come together on it.
How much of a reduction would that be in the income tax rate, do you think?
I think you can almost you could get down to maybe a 4.9% rate, potentially, or very close. Or fiscal analyst is supposed to report to that to me this afternoon to see what the possibilities are as far as the rate is concerned.
That wouldn't include putting that personal exemption and to Taylor's.
You'd have to leave the personal exemption out, but
yeah.
You shouldn't call it a personal exemption because it has nothing to do with a regular personal taxes. It's business income. It's the business income deduction that now is going to be listed as equivalent as a personal, as an itemized deduction.
Well,
Not every taxpayer is in business either, remember that.
Right, well, that was my point about the personal exemption, because I think your question was, what about W-2 folks that are now paying more taxes? And I think Valentine was explaining to both of us that there is an effort to look at what size of personal exemption would make the state whole in terms of not getting extra revenue. For those W-2
Well, that would be
folks.
one approach,
Yeah.
because they do away with the exemption in the federal law, and we piggyback off the federal exemption, so anything times 0 is 0.
Right.
So yeah, we could do that, or we could also enhance the standard deduction. Those are some possibilities.
Or lower the rate.
Or lower the
Or lower the rate, or a combination of those things.
And one thing I hope doesn't get lost is, I heard the question asked a few times, is, the state revenue goes up, and I think we need to remember that the overall net tax that the taxpayer pays, because added federal in, is lower. And I think former Senator Commissioner Valentine made that point last night, is that even though the $80 million is an increase, the overall net savings to the taxpayer is significant. And obviously we need to deal with this on a state level, but I wouldn't want anybody to think that somehow their overall tax payment went up, because I think it's very positive what the federal government did, I think overall for taxpayers, and now we need to react to it.
You know, we've adopted this 5% flat tax in the state of Utah. The effective rate is 3.8. I think the one thing is if we do nothing, we move closer to having a flat tax, a true flat tax in the state of Utah, instead of allowing a lot of exemptions, which moves us away from the whole idea of a flat tax.
Senator Davis, what would you like to see? Do you feel the state has an obligation to return that money back to taxpayers? Or how do you sell them on paying more in Utah? Even though, as you say, Senator Adams, overall it's net, but people are gonna.
I think as I take a look at my taxes, because I don't have a lot of write-off. A lot of people in my district don't have write-offs. And they're paying the 5% right now, while others have exemptions and deductions that they can take off their taxes. I mean, if we're truly committed to a flat tax in the state of Utah, let's do a flat tax. If we're not, let's not play around and say that, the top rate in the state of Utah is 5%, and those who are able to write off exemptions and deductions and everything else get a lower tax rate. I mean, because basically that's what we're saying right now. The top rate in the state of Utah is 5%. And if you're lucky and you have deductibilities and other things, you get a tax cut. And I think, the one effect of the federal thing, the federal tax law, it gave everybody a higher income. Because if we weren't tied to the AIG, it wouldn't matter.
Senator Davis is spot on, in my opinion. While on its face we have a single rate system, we really have a graduated system. And if you have the ability to take a lot of deductions, you're paying a very low rate, probably even less than 3.8, because that's kind of the average. And then if you're outside the phase out of the exemptions and deductions that we've had historically, you're paying 5%. And so everybody bemoans that we have a single rate tax system. We don't. People's effective rates are much lower, and there is a graduated system. It's the phase out part.
But I'm hearing that as an option of something we could explore, but no actual proposal to get into the fours and just say we're getting rid of exemptions overall. I mean,
I'd encourage Senator open up a bill file. I'd love to have that discussion.
I think it's a fair debate.
Yeah, I love that idea.
We did away with the graduated tax system in the state of Utah a number of years ago. But basically, all we've done is given a top rate of 5% in the state of Utah. And unfortunately, because the deductions and everything else that we have allowed to be taken affects those without those exemptions. Those who have raised their children already, and business deductions and everything else that we have allowed in the code has given us an effective rate of 3.8, or as the president indicated, even below that for some.
Yeah.
And those of us who don't have that, which I would say is a basic majority of the people, are not getting their deductibility.
But it's mortgage, it's charitable deductions, those are the big ones, right?
That's right.
Wouldn't this discourage charitable
Children are
deductions?
probably the first.
Yeah.
The big deduction is historically, we don't have the exemption now unless we act on something, but that was the biggest part, was the exemption. And then the standard deduction, and then the itemized deductions. That's the order of the magnitude. And our itemized deductions really were a small part of getting to this effective rate. And for a lot of Utahns that were outside the phase out, they were already, and my guess is that they were still donating a lot of money, because that's where probably the big donors would land, is outside there. And I just don't think it's as big an incentive as it once was.
That could put a lot of money into education very quickly.
Yes.
And that's where to be dedicated.
Yeah.
Correct.
I mean, Senator Jones, a couple of years ago, she was probably just a little bit ahead of her time. She was looking at broadening the base and by limiting the number of exemptions. And I know that was
part of the
we tried.
debate.
Yeah, that was part of that
So
debate.
Senator Davis, just to be clear, you don't want to see that $80 million, you don't want to see it cut or something else, or a personal exemption added to give that back? You think that it's more fair for the state to keep that money?
You know, we argue up here all the time about the feds and what the feds do, and we don't want to be tied to it. I think I would add that to the debate as well. Should we be tied to everything the feds have done in lowering? I mean, our tax rate, our going to a 5% was never based upon federal taxes to begin with.
But again, what the situation you're in now with that $80 million, what do you want to see done with
You
that?
know, when I take a look, am I really advantaged, and people in my income category, are we advantaged at all by the federal tax break? Probably not.
So
In fact,
what-
we'll probably end up paying more. When you figure if you don't have the, you know, if you take a standard deduction, my deductibility has been done away with. A lot of my itemized stuff has been done away with.
So what do you do with the state money, the extra state money that's coming in?
I think I agree with Senator Stevenson of the fact that that's money that's needed in education. I mean, it's not that it's flush money that's just going to go willy-nilly. This is new money that'll go into public education, and it's dedicated to that. And if you take a look, there's the referendum to try to put more money into education to begin with.
So I just also want to be clear that we haven't had a chance to even talk about these. These are just ideas, I think, today, and I think there's a great discussion, and there's some great ideas being thrown out. Senate leadership, our caucuses will be meeting and kind of trying to bring some common ground, and then we'll be working with the House, obviously, and the governor's office to see where there is some consensus.
Oh, go ahead.
I invited Senator Harper in today because we talked quite a bit about transportation yesterday. And maybe that's a past news story, but I just wanted him to be here to answer any questions and maybe just give some of the question is, is UTA on board now with your bill, the governance issues that are in your bill? Where are our stakeholders?
We had, thanks for the questions and the invite. We had our last Transportation Task Force meeting yesterday morning for the governance and funding. There was a resolution adopted by the UTA board in support of the bill. The Association of Counties, the League of Cities and Towns spoke in favor of the bill. We had a number of stakeholders speak to the bill and in support of the bill. So bottom line, that draft bill came out of the task force yesterday with a unanimous vote. We had private sector, business, chamber, mayors, county council members of that all on the task force. It was really a different aspect and prospect to have so many people that were non-legislators on a task force, but I think we got something done. The only concerns that have come up with the bill now is should the UTA Board of Trustees be 3 or 5, and I think everybody's settled on a 3-member Board of Trustees, full-time paid, who are responsible for day-to-day operations in conjunction with a general manager. There's some questions as...
There's a general manager also?
Yes, there will be a executive director, general manager, because the three people operate more like a tax commission does, and so you need to have somebody like a Barry Conover in there to handle the day-to-day operations. So that's what we came up with. The main questions that came out is the increase in the vehicle registration fees on hybrid and alternate fuel vehicles. Is that the proper level? No one disagrees that there shouldn't be an enhanced registration so that they can go through and Well, let me rephrase. I've had a couple comments saying, no, don't tax me on that, but they have to pay for the use of the roads, so that's what we're looking at in respect to the clean air issues. The other thing is there's a proposal on the hotel tax to increase that in order to fund some of the transit and transportation things, especially as they get off of the Wasatch Front. Those are the main things. People really like what we're doing, saying this will enhance the ability to have cleaner air in Utah as well as deal with some of the congestion issues.
You say everyone likes those things, but yesterday in our availability, there were some concerns raised about the size of the transient tax from leadership, because you're going from a newly imposed...
From a 0.32 to 0.5. Yes, and that's, and I've had discussions with members of Senate leadership and others already on that. We wanted to put something out there so we can identify an amount of money, and all those things are subject to negotiation.
And the same with the gas or the non-gas vehicles, the electric and hybrid vehicles. There were a number of people who testified who said that would disincentivize, and I think a member of the task force raised that too, that would disincentivize people from spending the extra money for those vehicles at a time when gas is cheap and they're already investing more, and now you're basically penalizing them in that.
Well, I wouldn't call it penalizing. It's a recognition of the way that we're going. Some people say by the year 2025 we'll have 10% of the vehicles being alternate fuel, electric or hydrogen. I got some information yesterday saying that they think it's going to be over 20%. Once you get, my personal view is once you get about 30% of the vehicles that are not paying the gas tax, there's a significant erosion in our ability to go through and fund the operation and maintenance of the system that we have. And it minimizes our ability to go through and take a look at saying, how do we go through and expand transit? Okay, albeit the motor fuel tax is dedicated towards operation maintenance. We're looking at using other state funds and other fees to go through and expand out transit, which I think is very critical. So you've got about 19 states that have passed that already, Oregon, Washington, California, Georgia, and other states. So we took a look at how they did it and said, okay, we've got an average amount that a similar class of vehicle pays, whether it's a hybrid or an electric vehicle. What does that same weight and type of car pay? And we went through and put the fee in less than that, about 15% less, to go through and say, yes, they need to pay, but they're also dealing and improving with air quality.
Usually those hybrid or alternate fuel vehicles get a free express pass, I suppose, used to anyway.
They used to, yeah.
And does that still exist? I can't remember.
If you have, there's a certain amount of clean fuel vehicle plates and tags that are out there. As long as they maintain those vehicles, they keep it.
My question would be, did you look at all at maybe having them buy transponders, and so they could decide voluntarily to pay that to get there rather than just giving it to them? So as they look at that, it's another way for them to pay, but they kind of do it more voluntarily, because if they don't get free access into that lane like they have in the past, they have to pay for it.
Right. That's something that as we have the study and look into road user charges and a couple other things, that's part of the study.
And tolls.
Yeah, well, and I think that revenue and tax, when I was chair years ago, we looked into this a little bit about it. We looked into incentives because I'd had some concerns. I was looking at trying to be responsible with the with our air and situation. That's important to me. And so I'd been looking for natural gas vehicles, and at the time we had some incentives towards natural gas vehicles. And it was magical that the amount of incentive was several $1,000s, and when I went out to look at a natural gas vehicle versus of the same model and make and model, it was magical that the price for the natural gas vehicle was the same amount of the incentive, more to buy.
those car dealers.
or manufacturers or whatever. So what happens is, I don't think it is an incentive, because the market adjusts. In our market economy, it adjusts. And so I just don't see it as an incentive. I think it's more of an incentive today for people just to buy an electric vehicle, because there's some positives with an electric there's some positives and some negatives with the electric vehicle.
But if I understand it correctly, all of the artificial intelligence, AI,
Just positives.
There's all going
I
to be
think I really
electrical
like the idea of electric vehicles, just the way they're built and the way they run. The issue with electric vehicles is how long you can go on a charge. That's
Right.
the biggest
Yeah.
issue, but that's being solved. And so I just think incentives, I think, are overrated.
We talked about the 600 million for what transportation is taking out of the general fund right now, and I know this package was heavily geared toward transit and getting us toward that future, and I hear a lot about the erosion of the gas tax base, but that's over the next decade. So between now and then, this session, are we going to talk about raising the gas tax as well, or is it just those other, the registration?
I'm not carrying the bill on raising the motor fuel tax. I think Senator Van Tassel has adequately addressed that, especially with the indexing for
Right.
inflation. What this bill does, and I think the beauty of it and the simplicity is we're setting a framework here that will go through and allow us to transition and adapt to artificial intelligence, automated vehicles, the change from, autonomous vehicles, and all these other new technologies coming in place, that we can be ready for that now and 40 years down the road as we double in population. That was one of the key things I wanted to do, is set up the framework that we can be responsive and more nimble than what we are now.
So not focus on the tax that you don't feel is going to last all that much longer anyway, realistically.
And prepare us for the future.
And-
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to clarify something. You said something about the transient room tax going up to 0.5. This says 5% per night.
Well, it's 0.32 up to 5%,
Up
yes.
to 5%. Oh, okay, because you said 0.5 just now, and I thought,
No, this is not an alcohol bill.
3.2 has a different meaning.
because 5% is a lot more than 0.5.
Yes.
So, okay, good. I just want to make sure.
Thank you for that clarification.
Appreciate it.
Is there? We'll take one more question, then. Time's up.
It was
Any other
on a different
questions?
topic, automatic voter
sure.
registration. His leadership talked about this. Do you guys have a position on the chances of that bill, since it did die in the Senate last year? Senator Henderson just filed a bill yesterday on implementing that here, so.
We don't have a position on it together. I'm personally in favor of it. I think it is a good thing for us. And I think there's a lot of safety features in this, so that we're not just automatically registering people that don't qualify to be registered. That's, I think, the biggest concern. I have more concern on, the actual voting. People need to, responsible voting is the most important thing to me. It's not who's voting, but that we have an informed voter, that they've looked at all the issues, that looked at the pros and the cons of the issues, and when we have a voter that really has paid the price to understand the issue, to understand the candidates, then I think we find the best candidates, the best policies come through.
This day and age, technology ought to help us with that. If you come up with ideas, let us know. Information is a real big deal, and I think it's a real easy thing to be able to tap into now. But I think that's one of the keys, is not just registering them, but getting good information out so people make responsible decisions.
So just
The
making
key
it.
is the information out. The thing we don't want to get into is where the state controls who can and cannot vote by a poll tax or a test of some kind.
Yeah, we're not, being registered to vote, that should be just, almost automatic. It's a fundamental right, but beyond that, everybody has to take responsibility, and making it easier and easier to vote, and making it without, so it's kind of this armchair voting thing. I think people need to pay a price to understand and go out and know the issues and then vote appropriately. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a good discussion. Sorry, Senator, I just wanted to make sure I didn't make a mistake.